Turn on recording. Okay. Alrighty. Okay, so we're going to chat about Sage 300 AP today. I've got 2023 up. 2024 is the current version, but there's really nothing different in AP, so that should work just fine. So sample company. So one thing you're going to find when you guys get your upgrade completed is that Sage 300 requires complex passwords. So what'll happen is when you log in, it's going to pop up a change password prompt, and you'll put in your old password and then your new one. So what you, yeah.
We're using Windows authentication.
Okay, then you should be good. All right. So anyway,
get you in.
Okay, so that should be, yeah, that should be fine. So, all right, so we're looking at sample data. Okay.
Can you make it any bigger on your screen?
You can do that on your end. I can't do it on my end. But there is something in GoToMeeting that'll allow you to increase your screen share. And I'm not sure exactly how that works. Did you find it?
Yep.
Good. Yeah, because I mean, it kind of is what it is, you know, on my end. So anyway, we're going to look at AP. This is AP 101. So we're going to pretty much go through everything. And this session is for your benefit, obviously. And please interrupt me and ask questions if you have any. And so we'll get started. So first thing I always do with AP is I review the setup options, because that dictates how things work. It also handles things like the GL default accounts, and which impacts transaction flow into the general ledger. So we'll look at the options first. So of course it reads the company profile from Common Services. The processing tab shows your functional currency, which for most of my clients is plain old single currency US dollar. Under process options, forced listing of batches would require you to print a batch before posting. I personally would find that really annoying, but some people like that. But that's where you would turn that on or off. Allow edit of imported batches. So if you're importing anything into AP, this would enable you to make changes to that imported batch prior to posting. Allow edit of external batches. So that would be batches that come in from purchase orders. And so that probably doesn't impact you guys. But what this would do is allow you to make changes to that prior to posting. Retainage accounting is for construction, where they hold back a percentage prior to paying the bill, which is typical with general contractors, and then they pay it later. So you don't want to turn this on, because it would, it's not necessary. Vendor and group statistics. Keep statistics, of course. Why wouldn't you? Allow edit of statistics. That allows you to make changes to the vendor statistics. Most likely this would be appropriate, like when you're first bringing up a system. Probably you wouldn't need to do this. And then how do you want to accumulate your statistics? Fiscal year or calendar year is your option. So that way you could see year to date by your fiscal year. Do you have a 6/30 year end? Yeah, okay. So you could elect how you want to do that. And then what is my period type? Fiscal period, weekly, 7 days, bi-weekly, etc., monthly. Mostly it would be fiscal period. I don't think in all my years I've run into anyone using the other options. So Age, unapplied credit notes and debit notes. So an unapplied credit note would be a credit note that hasn't been applied to an existing invoice. The default here is to age these as current. Because a credit note, it really doesn't make sense to say, oh, this credit note is 60 days past due. I mean, that's kind of bizarre, but you can age them by date or as current. That's an option. The same goes for unapplied prepayments. The default is as current. The default number of days to keep comments, the default is 999, but you can change that here. The transaction tabs. So there's two dates that are interesting to us in accounts payable. One is the document date. The other is the posting date. The document date dictates how a due date is calculated for terms, like if it's 30 days or 15 or whatever. That would be your document date, which is your invoice date, your check date, credit note date. The posting date is the GL posting date. So where is it going to land in the general ledger? Usually this is going to be the same, but sometimes at month end, you might want to say, all right, this is October 31st, but I actually want to show it up in November or something like that. So your document date would be the invoice date so that it would age appropriately, but then the posting date allows you to control where it lands in the general ledger. You're probably not tracking sales tax and AP, but this is where you would set defaults for that. So if you were, like this is really important in Canada where they can get provincial sales tax back if, it's a different province or something like that. They might track their AP. But anyway, these are your options, and the options are to enter it, manually calculate it, or distribute it. And the same with the tax base. So the tax base would be the taxable base, your invoice amount that you're applying tax to. This section, use 1099 CPRS reporting is turned on because we want to track that. CPRS is the Canadian equivalent to 1099, so you will never use that. It's stored in the same bucket in Sage 300, but you're never going to want to go in and print CPRS because I have one client that uses that because she's got some foreign vendors and needs to report but doesn't want them showing up in the 1099. So, that's the only example of a U.S. person using CPRS as just a different bucket. Default CPRS, if that checkbox is checked, then what's going to happen is your 1099 amount for a 1099able vendor will be the total amount of the invoice. So if your invoice is $300, that field will be populated with $300. 1099 amount can be edited if needed, but usually you want it to be the same so that you don't forget to capture it. If the 1099 amount is not captured at the time of invoice entry, it will not be added to your year-to-date bucket when you pay the bills. So anyway, that's an important thing to understand. Default tax class to 1. Again, that is for a vendor or for companies who are tracking sales tax in accounts payable. So tax class 1 might be taxable or non-taxable or whatever. But again, for AP, this doesn't apply. The next section, payment options. So when you're entering a payment batch, your default transaction type is set in this example to payment. So that assumes that you're paying invoices that have been entered already into AP. The other option is prepayment, apply document, which I can't imagine that being your default, or miscellaneous payments. So if you enter AP only when you're getting ready to pay and use miscellaneous payment, you might want to change that. But most companies use payment. And of course, this can be changed at the time of data entry. Okay. Default order of open documents. So how do you want your documents to be sorted in accounts payable payment window when you're selecting them to pay? You can change this again at the batch level, but the defaults are set here. So it might be document, PO, due date, order number, document date, current balance, maybe ascending or descending, or original document number. So again, most people sort by document, but you might want to sort by due date. That could be useful as well. Default bank code for accounts payable. You set that here. So if you get a new bank, this is where you would go in and make that change. Default payment code, you might have checks, you might have ACH, you might have online. This would be the default. What would be coming up at the time of data entry. Of course, this can be overrid as well at the time of data entry. Check for duplicate check numbers. So do you want a warning? Do you want an error? Do you want nothing? So a warning would just, hey, by the way, this is a duplicate check number. An error would stop you from going forward. In Sage, anytime you see a warning, it's just a, hey, letting you know that this is, whatever, but you can go forward. An error will stop you, okay? So that's check for duplicate check numbers. How do I want to sort checks by transaction entry number, vendor number, payee name, etc. So usually people want checks like in order of their batch, but you can change that default here. And so that's when you're getting ready to print checks and it has a list of checks that you're about to pay. Again, we have the default posting date, just like an invoice posting date default. Document date, which in this case is the check date. You could also have the batch date, which is the date at the top of your batch, or the session date, which is the date you enter when you log into Sage. You can tell your session date by looking down here in the lower right-hand side of the screen. You can see session date is 4/12/2024. You can log into Sage, as you know, at a different date. And what I usually recommend, if you're doing a whole lot of work for month end, like, you're really working and doing a lot for 3/31, you might want to make your session date 3/31 so that all your entries default to 3/31, which of course can be overwritten, but it can save you some keystrokes. So that's default posting date. Include pending transactions. A pending transaction is a transaction that's been entered but not paid. So your options here are payments and adjustments, only payments, or all transactions. So pending transactions, that's how you decide what you want to see. So if you have a vendor and you've just entered a payment for that vendor for a specific invoice or series of invoices, if you enter that vendor in another payment entry, it's going to show those invoices in the first payment entry as pending. That prevents you from paying the same invoice twice, which is kind of important. The next three checkboxes allow adjustments in payment batches. So if you're paying an invoice, but you need to adjust it, maybe, your vendor is saying, hey, all right, we're going to give you a credit for something that wasn't right or whatever. You can make that adjustment either before you pay it or at the time you pay it. Allow remit to info to be changed. So that would allow you to change your remit to information before you print the check. So in vendors, you can have multiple remit to addresses if you need that. So turning this on would allow someone to make that change. Allow edit of system generated batches. A system generated batches is a check run. So that's where that would show up. Allow edit of system generated batches. So if you wanted to edit and say, hey, I actually don't want to pay this invoice, you could go fix that before posting. Most people have that turned on. Numbering, these are not, well, they are editable, but some of them are, some of them aren't. So recurring payable, if you have recurring payable, the system can number or will number your document numbers for you. The default prefix is RP for recurring payable. The default length is the maximum, which is 22. Most people don't really want that many leading zeros in their document numbers, so you might make that 10 or 15 or something like that. And then this is just the next number in the sequence. I recommend that you don't mess with this because if you do, what can happen is you can end up with duplicate invoice numbers. And sometimes it happens to show up in the same vendor and then won't let you run the recurring. So usually this is a set it and forget it. Same goes for payment. Of course, you have your check number, but internally Sage has a payment number, which is stored in the system, and that's auto numbered by Sage 300. And the reason for that is your check number could be duplicated, or if you have ACH payments or something like that, that actually doesn't have a check number. So that's the only way Sage can track that internal document number. Prepayments.
I think you and I, when we first started meeting, we changed the number of the ACHs around so that we could identify them separately, which helps for bank reconciliation
Right.
purposes.
Yep. And then adjustments, same thing. And then these are not editable. This just shows me my next invoice batch, next payment batch, and so on, next posting sequence. And then the retainage tab you will not have because you're not construction, but this would be where you would set up default retainage and retention period, and so on. Okay, so for construction companies, this is an important feature, but for not-for-profit, not so much. So that is the AP options. So I'll go ahead and save those changes. The next thing we set up are account sets. You have to have at least one, but you can have as many as you want. And what this does is it allows you to group your vendors by account set. There's also vendor grouping. So there's a couple ways you can do it. But what this does is it sets default GL account numbers. That's the most important thing. So account code set trade in the example of sample data. This is where you tell the system what is your AP account number, what account number to use for purchase discounts, prepayments. So you usually don't want to use the AP account. You want to show your prepayments as a liability, or no, it's an asset. Sorry, it's an asset. So prepayments for AP, or you could have it in the AP section as a contra, kind of like a contra account for AP, however you want to show it. And then the default retainage AP, which doesn't apply to you. You can see in this sample data, we've got a couple control accounts. When you create a vendor and a vendor group, you assign that vendor to a specific control account, and that'll dictate all these account numbers that are kind of under the hood. Like when you enter an AP invoice, you don't really see the GL account number for that liability, but when it shows up in GL, you'll see that. So this is where you set that up. So you want to make sure that's correct. I've seen a lot of setups where people put the AP account in all four fields and then wonder why their AP's out of balance. So you definitely want to make sure that's flowing correctly. And if your AP is imbalanced, my guess is it probably is. So 1099 CPRS code, there's been a lot of changes in the past few years. The first change was that the IRS split out the NEC, non-employee compensation. So we had to identify that so that the system would know which 1099 payments are going to land on. So you can see there's a lot of, well, I don't know, you can see that there are a lot of options here. A lot of these options were not here just a year ago. So actually, I worked with Sage on this because I have a couple clients with some really weird 1099 stuff, and they've improved that after some requests by me and my clients. So anyway, so you've got all of these types, dividends, capital gain, ordinary dividends, withholdings, all that stuff. So anyway, you would have a code set up for each one that you need. It's very important to identify that the tax recording type is 1099 and not CPRS. And then once you identify that, you have to tell the system what kind of 1099 it is, so it'll land on the right spot on your 1099 form. So that's pretty simple, but it has a great impact on how your system functions in January. Distribution codes are shortcuts for AP entry. So if you want to set them up, you can. You don't have to, but you're basically linking a code to a general ledger account. So you might have, just really all kinds of different options. Maybe freight would be one. Purchase of inventory will not apply to you. But anyway, there's shortcuts that you can use when you're entering. Of course, you can also use the Finder and the GL. So it's an optional feature. The next feature is also optional, but it can be really helpful. So this one is called a distribution set. So a distribution code is linked to a single GL account number. A distribution set is linked to a group of account numbers. So maybe your corporate credit card, you might want to set up for like your different things that get charged on the corporate credit card. So when you enter that invoice at the end of the month, it's going to auto populate these account codes, so then you can just fill in the amounts. So
Carol,
yeah.
I do have a question. We currently have corporate cards, but we don't put them through AP. So it's a manual journal entry. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sandy, Bobby, Jess. And there's no detail that we pull in. So it's really difficult to do any kind of analysis in our system.
Okay.
I do have to get off the call, but can you cover that a different way that maybe we could handle that?
Yeah, we can definitely cover that.
Okay.
So yeah, we'll talk about that when we get into invoice entry. You can also set up your credit card as a bank so that when you're paying things, it goes to the credit card bank, and then you can reconcile that at the end of the month. You can also turn on bank feeds, which we're not going to talk about today, but that links to your bank, pulls in the transaction from your statement, and then you tie them to entries in Sage. They're in your bank from AP or AR. And if they're not there, you can add them as a bank entry. So that might be a separate training session that we do.
Absolutely. I just wanted to bring that up because I think it might be helpful in the future. I've got to run. Thank you
All right.
so much.
You're welcome.
Have a great weekend, everyone.
You too. And I'll send you a link to the recording when I am done.
Okay.
All right.
And Bobby, Sandy, and Jess, ask her like a gazillion questions because she knows it all.
Please don't feel like you're interrupting me because this is you're paying for this, so we want to make sure you get the most out of it. So
right. Bye.
Bye, Lisa. Have a great weekend.
You too.
So again,
if I could ask, it's just a general question. You're showing us all of these options and things to fill in and choose. Are we doing this come July when we're in the new company, or are we getting access to this ahead of time?
Well, these are features that exist now, with the exception of some of the 1099 types that has changed since version 2021. But I'm going to show you that. But a lot of these features have been there since inception, of the product.
Okay, but once we start the new company, are these things that we're going to have to then take care of and go in and make sure they're set to how we want them?
Correct. Correct. Yep. Yep. Now, if your general ledger accounts, now, are you changing your GL account numbers in the new system? Yeah, okay. So importing a lot of this stuff probably not going to really make any sense because you'd have to then go in and edit a lot of it. But I'll tell you like what you can import from the old and into the new kind of as we go through.
Okay.
But yeah, so you can set these up in the new company, and you can set them up in the old. I mean, anything to make your data entry easier is worth it, in my opinion. So that's distribution sets. Terms, these can be exported out of the old and into the new. So whatever terms you have in both AP and AR can be pulled in. So you can pretty much, I have yet to see a terms that we couldn't create in AP and AR. It's really quite flexible. So the default or the most standard terms that you see are things like 2%, 10 days net 30, or just plain old net 30, or like N30, or due upon receipt. So we're going to go through all these. So 2%, 10, this will handle your discounts. It'll help you not to miss your discounts. So what kind of tax, we're excluding that because again, you're not tracking sales tax. Usually you would calculate base for discount with tax excluded if you were tracking sales tax. Due date type, what kind of due date type is it? Days from invoice date. So, the date of the invoice is March 15th. It's due on April 15th. You can also tell the system that it's due the end of next month or a specific day of next month, like a lot of credit card bills are due on the 12th, or electric bills are, calculated due on the 15th or whatever. Days from day of next month. So day of next month might be the 10th, and that might be due in 7 days after that or something, or a due date table. So we'll talk about that as well. The discount type, again, you've got these same options. How am I going to calculate my discount type? Again, in this example, it's days from the invoice date. So in this example, it's a single payment. 100% is due on 30 days. However, you can have a 2% discount if it's paid in 10 days. So that's 2% net 30. COD, you might also call it receipt, REC, or N0, net 0 days. The code doesn't matter. The calculation does. But the payment number 1 is due in 0 days. In other words, when I get the invoice, it's due, and I need to enter it accordingly. A due table. This is a bizarre one, which honestly I've yet to run into. But so what a due table is 100% due, and then the due date is based on if it's the 1st or the 10th, it's due on the 15th. If the invoice date is between the 11th and the 20th, it's due on the 25th. Again, I've been working with this system since it came out in the 90s. I haven't seen this yet, but I'm sure somewhere someone is using it. But that's what a due date table is. Again, simple net 30, single payment due in 30 days, no discount. Multiple payments. So you can set this up if you've got a vendor that says, I want you to, you can pay it in 2 installments. You can have up to 5 payments, I think. And then you tell it how many days and what percent. This is a discount percent. 60% is due in 30 days. You can get a discount percent if you pay it in 10 days for the first payment. The remaining 40% is due in 60 days. You can get a discount if you pay it within 40 days. So that's a due date table. The total percent has to add, of course, to 100. Here's another multiple payments, 50%, 30%, 20%, 30, 60, 90. So if you have vendors like that, you can set that up. And the advantage of this is you don't have to manually edit what you're paying. And also your aging will be appropriate. Because if you don't set it up like this, some of those payments are going to show up as 90 days past due, which actually they're not. So that's terms. Again, it's very flexible. If you can imagine it, probably it can be done. Payment codes. Of course, you've got ACH, which is, of course, an ACH. This does not generate an EFT file. You need another piece of software for that, but you can record your ACH payments. Recording your ACH payments prevents you from having to print fake checks, okay, if you use that as a payment type cash, and we'll talk about that when we get to payments. Petty cash is another cash type payment type. The payment types can be cash, check, credit card, or other. Of course, check is check. If the payment type's check, it's going to bring you into the print check thing where you would print checks. And then we've got some different multi-currency options here. Diners Club, Visa, so you can set up your payment types. Wire transfer, online might be one. Some people set up one as PayPal, so you can, identify your payment types. If you are emailing your vendors and you have emailing set up in common services, you can send vendor, nice little emails to your vendors if you want. This is more common in accounts receivable where you might email your invoices, but you can also email your vendors, and you can set defaults, that would go in there. Okay. So that's vendor emails. GL integration dictates how the system communicates how AP talks to general ledger. So accounts payable, of course, we've got our posting sequence. So general ledger transactions have been generated through posting sequence 34 in sample data. So this is just informational and cannot be edited. Source codes, this is how we identify our AP source codes. So APIN is invoice. So this is where that's set up in AP, and then this flows into GL. So when you're printing your GL or you're looking at GL transactions in your inquiry, you can immediately say, oh, that was an AP credit note. So these are your identifiers. How are GL transactions created? Most people have during posting. You can also do on request, but that's that's a manual process. You have to go into periodic process and then do it. I personally prefer on during posting, and I also prefer creating and auto posting a new batch. So when I post an AP invoice batch or payment batch, it automatically creates the GL batch and it posts it, and then I don't have to remember to go in and post it. Now, a lot of people don't like this because they're like, but I want to edit my AP batch. I recommend against that because your audit trail would be broken if you edit the batch, because what shows up in an AP batch will no longer be the same. The other problem with it is I've known of people accidentally deleting an AP batch in the GL, and then it's a nightmare to figure out which one you're missing. So there's a lot of reasons, convenience being the top one for creating and posting a new batch. Consolidate GL transaction. I hate consolidation. I recommend against it because then you have no drill down. And part of the beauty of Sage 300 is if you're on a GL transaction inquiry, you can drill all the way down to AP. If you consolidate, you can't. So yes, your general ledger gets big, but really who cares, in my opinion. I like drill down. This is a rather intimidating screen, but this dictates what lands in your GL fields. So this dictates what shows up in my general ledger invoice batch header and the detail lines. So this is what's going to be what shows up on your general ledger. So let's open one up so that we can explain this more visually. So I'm going to go to GL transactions, and I'm going to find an AP batch. So I'm going to put AP in here, and we'll just go here. And this is a good example. It's an AP invoice batch. So in Sage 300, all batches have two components: the header, which is up here, and the detail, which is down here. So your header is things like your entry description, your document date, your posting date, source code. So that's in your batch, your entry number, that's your header. The details is this grid. So the header is above the grid, details are below the grid. So what happens when I post an AP batch? So if I look at my GL integration, you've got two lines for each transaction type. So invoice and invoice detail. So invoice, this dictates what happens for the control account line in your GL entry. So that would be your AP control account. The invoice detail shows up in the expense account side, or what you key in when you're entering an AP. So if I drill down to the original entry here, come on, you can see AP clearing, that's my detail, okay? And you can see here's all my header information for AP, this is my detail. So when you're setting up your GL integration, I personally like to make these consistent. So my detail reference is always going to be the same, whether it's on the control account side or the expense account side. So looking at this, my reference is vendor number. Let's make this wider. Vendor number, vendor name. And then that's on my control account. And then my detail description, I'm sorry, I have that reversed. My detail reference is vendor number, vendor name. My detail description is description, okay? Or sorry, document type, document number. I'm sorry, I'm confusing you. So document type, document number. And you can see that's consistent all the way down the line. So takes a little to set this up, but it's worth the effort. The GL entry description is this part up here, okay, which is nice, but not as critical as what shows up in your GL detail. So this would allow me in my general ledger listing to say, this entry, $452.75, was for vendor 1200 chloride systems for invoice number 123456. So that's good information. So to change this, you double click on the row and then you choose what you're doing. So the entry description, the detail description or detail reference, So I'll click on that, and you can say vendor number, vendor name. If you don't like the order, you can take them out and then just say, all right, I want this one first, and then I want that one. And then the last thing is the comment. So if you want to dictate what shows up in the comment, you can do that. And let's see what they have. Batch type and batch number. So that would be what kind of AP batch is this? It's an invoice batch. What was the batch number? So again, these are all the things you can include to send. You can have as many as you want, but understand that the fields only have so far before they get truncated. So that's something. And I wish you could export this and import it in, but you can't. You have to just set this up manually. And if you have more than one company, you've got to do it in every company. So, but it does matter because that's going to dictate what lands in your general ledger. So that's GL integration in AP setup. And I think that's the last thing in setup. No, it's not. Sorry. Payment selection codes. So when you're doing a check run, you can set up different payment selection codes to do different things. So this one is all vendors. You tell which bank it's going to be, and you set up your criteria here. And in this example, it's from nothing to ZZZ all the way down, which means everything that's due. So that would be your all. You can also tell the system, I only want to do a check or a payment batch for my ACHs. And in that example, you would set your payment code to only vendors with ACH. You might do one that was just checks. So I would say checks only. And I want payment code check to check. That way you can create system batches only for the payment type that you're wanting to do. Okay. So that's how that works. So we'll look at that when we do some payments. Last but not least, optional fields. Optional fields are there to store anything you want in any module you want. So an optional field is created. Sorry, I'm on the back end of a cold. For any data that you want to store that does not already exist in accounts payable. So you can attach optional fields to vendors and vendor groups, to remit to locations, to invoices, invoice details, payments, and adjustments. You can set up optional fields to transaction details that will flow all the way up to the general ledger. And then, you can run reports that would include that. So optional fields is just there to store extra information that's not already in the system. Okay. So like invoices, invoice details, so we'll see that when we do vendors. So anyway, you would set those up in common services. So if you're ever in a situation where you're like, geez, this information is something I really need, but there's nowhere in Sage where I can store it, then that's where you would set up an optional field. Okay. So that's just file that away, know that it's there, and we can set them up at any time. So once you finalize entering all your setup information, the next thing you'll do is do your vendors. So vendor groups, that's the first thing you would set up. You can't set up a vendor without having at least one vendor group. You can have unlimited vendor groups, but you have to have at least one. Vendor groups set defaults for setting up your vendors. It's also a way to slice and dice and group your vendors into different categories. And you can report a lot of reports. You can sort by vendor groups and so on. So in this example, we've got a vendor group that's called ACH, and it's your monthly ACH vendors only. So when you set up a vendor group, you have to set up a default account set, default terms, default bank code where you're paying them from, and default payment code. Now, when you enter a vendor and add it to this group, these things can be overwritten. So a default is just what it's called, a default, but you can always override that if you've got a vendor in the ACH group that's net 15, for example. And then on the invoicing tab, you can set certain defaults. Most people for distribute by set none for the GL, because probably your vendors are going to have different defaults depending on what they are, unless you sort your vendors and group them by type, and you might at that point say, well, these are office supplies or something else. But anyway, you can set a default distribution set, a distribution code or GL code or none. Duplicate invoice checking, probably not for a vendor group, because you might have a duplicate invoice number between two vendors in the same group, and it would be annoying to have that pop up all the time. Tax reporting, 1099 or CPRS. You could create a vendor group for 1099 vendors where you would set that as your default, but you can also set that up at the vendor level rather than the 1099 level. Again, you can set up optional fields that would be in a vendor group and then would show up also in your vendors when you added a vendor using this group. So some of these sample optional fields are like account number, AP contact, which is kind of redundant now that we have multiple fields, which you're going to see, discount level, so on. So anyway, these are just things you can do. And then statistics are accumulated by vendor group. The sample data has data in 2020. So let's see, we can see, for vendor group, inventory, purchases, you've got some statistics by period and year. So it does accumulate that for us. So again, vendor groups, you can have as many as you want, but you have to have at least one. So once you have vendor groups, you can start adding vendors. So here we are, we've got a vendor. Sample data uses numeric vendor codes. That's not really my preferred method. I personally like alphanumeric because it's easier for the data entry person to kind of figure out what the vendor code might be. So if I had been setting up sample data, chloride systems would have been CHL01 or something like that. But anyway, the vendor number, that's your index field. It must be unique. You can't have two vendors with the same code. So in my alphanumeric example, if you had two that started with CHL, then that would just be CHL02 and so on. Name and address, vendor group code, there's that. Business registration number. You can use that for your account number inside that vendor if you want. That could be possibly printed on a check if you wanted. Then, of course, here's your name, address, vendor overall, email, and website. Contacts, of course, you've got your contact and name, phone number, and email. In the new system, you can also have multiple contacts. I don't think that's available in 2021. I think that came out in 2022, but multiple contacts. So I can create additional contacts for this vendor, which is kind of handy. So I could say create new contact. New contact might be sales, or let's see, 1200 sales. And then we're going to say, Jones, Mark, and, put all their information in here. And then when you save that, now you can see, you've got multiple contacts. You can also do this in AR. And you can also set up accounts receivable so that if you're emailing invoices, you can tell the system to email to multiple contacts and then check the ones you want. That way your AR invoice will go to like 3 people instead of just one. So it's kind of nice. So that's something that's new. You can have as many multiple contacts as you want. Processing. So these defaults come from your vendor group, but can be overwritten at the time of entering the vendor. So this one is an account set USA. Their terms are due table. This is the bank we use, the payment code. So check US dollars. And then check language would be English. And then delivery method. It's going to be mail because you're not going to email a check, I don't think. This checkbox generates separate check payments to each invoice. You can do that if you want. I've had clients accidentally check this and then, they print a check and they're paying 4 invoices and then they print out 4 checks. So if that ever happens, this is where you would go check that. Oh yeah, uncheck that. But if you needed to do that, yeah.
For payment code, if we were to choose ACH and then delivery method email, what does that mean? What would that do for us?
That's a really good question. We can find out.
Because we email a lot of remittance information to people.
Yeah. Have you guys ever talked to Jim about the EFT program? You might want to look at that because that program allows you to store the banking information in your vendor or for your vendor and create the file that you would upload to your bank and also send an email to your vendor. And I can show you actually what that, because I have a couple clients that send me payments that way. So let me find, let's see, ACH. So here's an example. So this is one of my clients that pays me by ACH. The system automatically generates this email. And then here's my remittance. So you can see. And let's move this over. So you can see, here's my bank. It has the last 4 and my email. So that might be, if you're doing a lot of ACH, that would probably be very worthwhile. Yeah.
That would be great.
Yeah,
Okay.
I will have Jim email you information. I'll also send you a link that talks about Orchid EFT. It's a great product. And you're also going to see some other Orchid products as I do this demo because I have them implemented. So anyway, I don't think it emails remittance, but that's something I can test and let you know. But the EFT is really nice because you're not, going into the bank and keying in all these ACH payments. The system actually will generate that for you. The next tab is the invoicing, and here we set our invoicing defaults. So how do I want to distribute? You can use the distribution codes if you use them, general ledger account or distribution set. Or none, then that would mean you'd have to key it in every time. So these again are your defaults, general ledger account code or distribution set that I usually use for this vendor, which could be overwritten at the time of invoice entry. So I'm actually going to choose distribution set because I think it's worth checking out. So we'll do Amex distribution. That's a good example. So duplicate invoice checking. You can't have 2 invoices of the same number, so it's going to pop up a warning, and then you'll have to change it. That prevents you from accidentally paying the same invoice twice. So duplicate invoice checking for the vendor and the amount. So that would be, of course, you can't have two invoices of the same number. It's going to not let you do that. But if you want it to warn you, if you have two invoices for the same amount, it can. But if you have, invoices that are always the same amount for a vendor, that would be actually really annoying. So you probably wouldn't want that warning turned on for this vendor. But anyway, that's an option. Vendor and date, again, if you get two invoices for the same date, do you want to be from the same vendor for the same date? Do you want to be warned or not? You have to have a tax group whether you're capturing taxes or not. And you just set it up with non-taxable and then use that tax group for that vendor. And it basically just doesn't do anything, but it is required. So again, you can see retainage here, which doesn't apply to you, but retainage percentage and period and terms and so on are set up here if retainage is turned on, which in your case it's not. Tax reporting. So this has changed. It's changed a lot. So if your vendor is 1099able, you want to turn it on, and obviously you want to set it up so that it's 1099. If you're in Canada, it would be CPRS. So that's the first thing. Once you turn on these fields, then turn on this option, then these fields appear. So these fields are really important. So the first one is your tax ID. So, of course, that's going to be your Social Security or your EIN. And it's really important because the IRS has gotten super picky. You want to make sure your vendor name is exactly how it appears on your W-9. So if those don't match the way it's filed with the IRS, what's going to happen is it's going to get rejected. So the other thing you want to make sure in your vendor name is that there are no commas or periods for 1099able vendors because, again, the IRS doesn't want that. So it would spit that out. So you want to make sure your W-9s tie out or consistent, with your tax ID and for your vendor. The next field is employer ID number. So, tax number type. This is also really important because you have to identify for filing what kind of tax ID it is. In the US, there are only two valid options: Social Security number or employer ID. Do not check GST. Do not choose business number. And do not choose social insurance number. And the reason for that is because they're the Canadian equivalents. I have a lot of people that choose business number because they think that's the EIN. It's not. And then your 1099s will be rejected, or they'll feed into Atrix, but you will have to fix all that, and that's a pain. So for the US are these two. For Canadian, it's these three, and that's the only option. If you're using a Social Security number, the IRS also requires the first and last name. You can leave these blank if it's a EIN, but if you don't populate these fields, that when it feeds into Atrix, you're going to have to manually do it. And this is another one of those changes that I requested from Sage, and they did it, which has made me very happy. The next thing is your default CPRS 1099 code. So your choices are, this is just however you have it set up, okay, in your system. Okay. All right. And again, first name and last name if it's a Social Security number. FATCA, honestly, I don't know what that is. Second TIN notice, I'm not sure what that is either. So we'll just leave that. I've not run into anyone who needs that. Tax withholding state, that's actually tax filing state. So you actually need to fill that in, and that is the state where you reside. Okay, it's not the vendor's state, it's your state. So you need to fill that in. And when you get upgraded and when you get the new company, we can actually export your 1099 vendors in. You can clean this up in Excel, and then I can help you import it back in. Because all of this information, first name, last name, and tax withholding state, those are all new fields. Okay. You will not see them in your current data. Optional fields, this is where you set this up for your vendor. So if you have them created, you can fill them in at the vendor level. Statistics, again, this is where your vendor statistics are accumulated. So I'll put in 2020 because the bulk of our data is in 2020. So you can just see these are my period to date statistics for the year selected. And then down here, you can see my year to date statistics. And if you're a fiscal year, this is not going to correspond with your 1099 amounts because you've got a fiscal year. And if you're accumulating by fiscal year, your 1099 accumulates for calendar year. Okay, so just be aware of that. Vendor notes, this will pop up and allow you to create notes for your vendors and customers. So you just click create new and say, this is a note. You can actually format it and bold it and do all that. You can make it active on specific dates. You can make it so it cannot be dismissed, things like that. Notes, the difference between notes and vendors is that a note is a pop-up inquiry type of a thing, whereas a comment is attached to the vendor itself, and it can also be printed out. So the notes are not things that you would be printing out. Vendor comments, on the other hand, can be printed out. So if so here's the one entered in 2019 with an expiry at the end of the month, a follow-up date, and then you can put a comment in here. To add comments, you just click in the grid, press insert, and then start typing in the information. Okay, so that's
Carol,
the difference. Yep.
Question on if we could go back to the 1099 stuff.
Yep.
What would Sage do for me? Like, why would I want to keep track of the 1099 for vendors in Sage? What will it then do for me at the end of the calendar year?
It will let you file them. Because as you know, you're not allowed to mail 1099s now if you have more than 10.
Right.
And so what you would not have to do is you would not have to enter your 1099 information in some external software. And if you're doing that now, that's a nasty manual task. So yes, actually that gives me anxiety just thinking about it, But
me too, and it's only once a year.
yeah, seriously. So that'll be something that we're going to do. We're going to look at making sure your year-to-date 1099 information is in the system and ready to go for you for next year. So we've got 9 months to get this sorted. So yeah, and I'm going to show you the 1099 thing. So
that was going to be my question. It will pick up the data even though we start the new system fresh, right?
You're going to have to no. 1099 information is captured and accumulated when you post a payment. The amount is captured when you enter the invoice, but the bucket is updated when you pay. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at your year-to-date through June because we're starting as of July 1st. Mm-hmm. So this is good. So your cutoff will be June. And so we're going to look at your year-to-date, calendar year-to-date in June, and then we'll just enter that in the 1099 field as of June 30th. And then when you start paying things in the new system, it'll start accumulating it. So put that
Okay.
on our to-do list.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So yeah, I'm glad I found out you were doing this manually because Lordy, Sage will handle this for you. So that's vendors. Remit to locations. If you've got a vendor with multiple remit tos, or even if you've got a vendor with multiple account codes, like maybe you've got different locations where you're paying an electric bill, you can set up one vendor, but then create multiple remit tos, and maybe use the last 6 digits of your account number for that remit to. It's an option. You don't have to do it. But if you do it, your remit to code, it can be up to 6 characters, alphanumeric. This description field, that's what's going to print on your check. So you don't want to say, Montana location or something like that. You want to actually have the company name, and then, your name and address information, contact, and email. So I had a client the other day that has one account with their vendor, but they actually have multiple accounts, but they keep it in one vendor account in Sage, but they're paying multiple vendors. So what they did is I showed them how to create remit to addresses, and they're going to put the account code. You can see I put it in the country code because they're US only. And then we can make the checks, we can move the country code so it's not like right up underneath the address, and print that on their checks. Let me close my office door quick. My Roomba, I don't want my Roomba coming in my office. So anyway, that's one way you can handle that. That's what we did for her. Vendor activity. So this is your vendor inquiry screen. So you can look at a vendor. You can look at what their credit limit is, what their outstanding balance is, if there's any prepayments, what was my last invoice, what was my last payment, do I have retainage outstanding? You'll never have that. The next tab, of course, is your aging. Okay, you can just look right there as a glance. The next tab is your transactions tab. So by default, it's going to show all transactions sorted by document number, and not include fully paid. So this right now is just showing me, what is outstanding for this vendor. You can rearrange this screen. So if you want to see your amount, your applied, I'm just dragging and dropping this here. Where's my applied amount? There we go. So original amount, current balance. So you can move it around so that the most relevant fields for you show up more on the left. And if you do make these screen changes, and by the way, all the grids in Sage, you can rearrange them like this by just dragging them and moving them. Like I can move this over here. That is saved by the user, so Sandy can have her way of looking at it. That's not going to impact Bobby and Jess. So this is stored within your user. So anyway, once you're looking at an invoice, you can click on details, and that's just going to show you the original amount, the current balance, and the distribution, so the GL account for that invoice. So that's details. Document is going to bring up the entry in AP, so you can look up and see more information about your document. Okay. Open is just going to show me the invoice and then anything that's been applied. Now, nothing's been applied because this is still outstanding. If I want to look at fully paid, I'm going to check that and hit the go button. And then I can look at one that's been paid. So here's one with a 0 balance. So if I open that, I'm going to see, here's my invoice, my posting date, my due date, original amount, what's been applied, and then below here, you can see that this was paid in installments. So you had $500, then $853, and then 13 cents. So you can see all the payments. If there was a check that was reversed, that would show up as well. If there was a credit note or a debit note, that would also show up in this field or in this grid. Okay. If you want to look at pending amounts would be payments. You can show that as well, and that would show things that are pending to be paid. Okay. And then you can also tell the system, I only want to look at invoices or, whatever. I want to look all documents. I can change my sort order. Maybe I want to look at it by document. Maybe I want it by balance. So I can actually change that and hit go. So if you go into this inquiry field, and by the way, the same applies to AR, and you're always changing this stuff up here, what you can do is click on settings and save settings as defaults so that the next time you go in, these new choices would show up. And you wouldn't have to change them again. That is saved within the user, and you can set it up for how you want to see it without impacting your coworkers. Payment tab, again, this is just your payment tab. I can see at a glance that this was not a check. This one was a check. Document. I can click and I can see my payment. This one I can see that this was an ACH or something. Cash payment. Open will show me the payment again. So that's your payments. You can sort by a document date or check number. Okay. CPRS inquiry. Okay, this is going to be a screen you're going to need to get to know very well because you're going to be fixing this in the new system. So if probably there's nothing in 2024. Let's go to 20. I think I posted some things for 2023. So here we are. Here's some data. So the 1099 data is accumulated by code. So the code 3 is for rents, 7 is for non-employee compensation, and so on. And it accumulates by month. So January, March, April, May, and July, and October. So what you can see in this line, this is probably one we entered manually. This one here, we had 2 checks or 2 payments totaling $950. A negative would indicate a reverse check, because if you reverse a check, it's going to take it out of the 1099 amount, and so on. And so you can see, we have a handful of 1099s here. If I need to edit something, so if I press the insert key, I can say, all right, ADS, it actually is ADS. I'm going to add something here. So let's say let's actually do 2024, and I'll show you what you guys are going to do. So right now there's nothing. So I'm going to put in my vendor number. I'm going to press insert, press here. And I'm going to put ADS 01. We're going to say non-employee compensation. Let's see which one. I need 7, just plain 7. 06. So what you're going to do is year to date in June. Last payment will be 6/31/30/24. I don't really care about number payments because that really doesn't matter. And let's say year to date, I've paid them, $4,825. So that's how you're going to add those amounts in when you go live. And we can do this at any time. This does not have to be done before the 1st, because you're not going to go printing any checks in your new system dated in June. So we're just going to enter year to date June, and we can use your statistics to figure that out, and I'll help you with that. So that's how you're going to enter that information and get year-to-date 1099 info in there. You'll also want to make sure that your vendors, when you pull them in or, before you go live, are set up as 1099 vendors so that you can start accumulating that data in July. All right. So that's 1099 inquiry. So I'm going to go
And
back to, yep.
Sorry. I noticed, because I'm looking at our system now whilst you're going through the
Yep.
system too. So we can export this data also.
Yeah, we can import that. We can put it in, we can export it out of Sage. I can export your statistics for periods 7 through 12 of 2024. And then I can help you get that dropped into here to import in. So
Well, I'm just
file.
even thinking like, for us to make sure, I know Sandy and Jess keep very detailed spreadsheets of all the 1099 people that we have. From this inquiry, can we export a report so that they can make sure everything is?
Yes. Well,
Okay.
you can do that. Or you can just click print. Okay.
Okay.
And here's your report. Wait a minute. I'm in the wrong. Whoops. I don't have a year. I don't have a valid year. So if I hit print, so this report has also been improved. It shows you the vendor number and your periods, and then your grand total for code 3. And then your grand totals, for this. I also have written a number of 1099 reports that I can give you, which does the same thing in a one-liner. It also will check to make sure that you have a tax ID and, things like that. So I'll provide you with that. Yep. So yeah. Anyway, so that's that. Do you guys do recur?
Sorry.
What's
I
that?
don't know how that will work for us pulling information because we're not utilizing 1099 in Sage right now. Like we have people labeled as it and we have Social Security number and EINs in there. But I have people who, like, we're not entering an amount when we enter invoices in that 1099 box is what I'm saying.
Well, we're going to change that. I mean, I would strongly recommend you change that. I mean, Sage does
No, I would love to.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
just saying
So you want to, so what you want to do is make sure in your setup, we're going to go back to AP setup options. You want to make sure default 1099 amount is checked. Because right here, okay, you want to make sure that's checked because it is going to default your invoice amount to populate the 1099 amount. So that's going to be
fine. It'll be the case with most of those payments, but not always. So can we override that?
You can zero it out if you need to. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and let's just take a look at the vendor
I
level.
believe ours is set up like that too. Looking at it, it does have the first three boxes checked.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean it's automatically, but you can edit it, and we'll see that when we get into invoice entry. So recurring payables, you can set these up so that they'll run based on your schedule. So you can have multiple schedules in Sage. So you set up schedules in common services. So scheduling, common services, schedules. So if we look at M1, you can see this is monthly on the 1st, hence the code M1. And how often is it monthly? Every how many months? 1. You could make it 3 if you wanted quarterly. And when on the first day. You can also have the last day or, any day of the month. So the first thing you would do is set up a schedule. You can use these schedules throughout Sage. So whether it's a journal entry for depreciation or rent payments or anything in AR that's recurring, you can use the same schedule. So you don't need to set up a schedule that is called depreciation, because you could just use MLAST, So Anyway, so the difference between a recurring payable and entering an invoice is you don't have an invoice date. You have an invoice date and an invoice entry. In a recurring, you have a schedule code and a start date, okay, and an expiry. So you tell us, you choose a vendor, you assign a schedule, you assign a date where you want it to start. You assign an expiration if there is, so it can expire after 10 invoices or after a maximum amount or number of invoices or a specific date or never, okay? And then the rest of it's your typical AP invoice header information with your account set, your remit to PO order number description, terms, and then 1099 code. So this invoice is $700 invoice. So I would make my 1099 code 700. Okay. And then here's my GL detail. It populates. You can also use recurring things. You can set them up with the GL codes and just have them as zeros if they change every month, just to make it easier. That's more typical in a GL entry, but it's something you can do. So anyway, that's your recurring. So when you run recurring, you do that in AP periodic processing, create recurring payables. So what's going to happen, I'm going to run this on a specific date. It's going to look at my recurring payable. Let me actually pull that back up. It's going to look at my the recurring payable in question. It's going to look and see when was my last invoice, and that will tell me last run, last generated 3/1. Next invoice date would be 4/1. So the system knows, when it was last run and when the next one's due. So if I were to run it today, I'd get 12 invoices or 13, because it would be April 2023 through April 2024. So you want to just be aware of the run date. So if I made it 05/01/23 and I want to run it for all of them, I'm going to create a new batch and I'm going to hit process. It's running them all. So the system knows I've done this. So if I go back and try to run it again, once it finishes, I don't know how many are in here, but if I try to run it again for May 1st, it will not run. It will tell me, let's see, so yeah, it's going to tell me that we got a lot of warnings because there were a lot of invoices. But anyway, if I try to process it again, it'll say no invoices were generated because I've already done it on the 1st. Okay. So anyway, that's recurring. So we're going to look now at AP transactions. So I always work from the batch list because then I can see everything I've got. Now you can see I did a whole lot of recurring invoices because there were probably things in sample data since 2020. But here they are. So you can see the recurring payable document number was assigned by the system, like we talked about earlier. The document date for 1/20/2023. Here are my general ledger entries. And that's that. You can edit it if you need to. You can see the document total and 1099 amount is here. Okay. Now, if I go in here and delete one of these recurring items, like say you realized, oh, I actually don't want to, that was the wrong amount, the vendor amount changed or something like that. What you want to do is you want to edit that invoice. You don't want to delete it, because if you delete it, you can't run it again for May 1st. So you'll have to just manually key it in. So that's like a real frequent mistake people make. They're like, oh, it's wrong. Let me delete it and I'll run it again. Well, the system knows that you ran it for May 1st. So that ship kind of sails as soon as you do that. So anyway, we're going to do a new transaction batch, and we're going to review the fields, and we'll use vendor 1200, which we've been using. So we've got, the first thing you have is your MIT2 locations. So if you need to change that, you can. You don't have to. Account set is going to default to the vendor account set. Document type, you've got all of these. You only will have 4. Sorry about the dogs. Invoice, debit note, credit note, interest. So in this example, of course, it's an invoice. So we're just going to call it 321 test. Document date, this is how it's going to age. The posting date is usually the same, but this is when it's going to hit the GL. So the posting date, like if you want to push it to next month, you can say like 5/1 or something like that. And then, of course, your GL distribution, I'll just make it 6,000. And, of course, I forgot to put my 1099 amount. So that's my 1099. So if the whole thing isn't 1099able, you can actually make this 600 if you need to, okay? And that's invoice entry. The next kind of document is we'll do a credit note. So a credit note, what happens when you enter a credit note, immediately when you change the document number, this apply to document field pops up. Notice when I go back to invoice, that disappears. So you always want to populate that so you don't end up with a vendor with a plus amount and a negative amount, which are the same amount because they still show up on your aging. So unless it's a credit note that you don't have anything to apply it to yet, you would want to apply it to something. So I'll apply it to this $800 invoice. And I'm going to use, you can actually copy and just go CN like that, and then paste it if you want. And then put a PO number if you want to put a description or something like that. And then I'll make $100 credit and $100 1099 credit, and then the GL distribution. Okay. So once again, the most important thing to remember about credit notes is that you want to fill in the apply to document number, so you don't have to go and apply it manually, which I'll show you also. Okay, and it's telling me there's already an invoice for that amount. So what? We don't care. So I'm going to do an unapplied credit note now, just so you can see how that's different. Okay. So we'll do 356.82, and we'll do our GL account 82. All right, so I'm intentionally leaving the document apply to document blank. So I've got some 1099 data. It's ready to show up in the 1099 field once I pay the amount. So we'll save and we'll post, and I'll say yes. So as you know, you can also post from the batch. I posted inside the batch, which is a new feature. I think you've got it already. I think it's been out for a while. But you can also click and post multiple batches in the batch list, and then just click post all. So you can pretty much do everything from the batch list. You can view posted and deleted transactions if you want by clicking this button. You can post batches. You can print batches. Let's print this one out if you want to review it. And we'll print it out. And we're waiting. Why is it taking forever? Okay, so, all right, I guess I need to reboot my server. But anyway, this is where he would print it out. So anyway, that's invoice entry. Oh, actually, I wanted to show you something else in invoice entry. Yeah, that's not actually set up, so I guess I won't. I'll come back to that. I'll show you in my own data what I wanted to show you. So anyway, that's invoice entry. I'm going to open up my own data here because I want to show you something that might be of interest. So I'll go into my own company. All right. So I talked to you about the entry for, I don't want that, I want AP. I talked to you about the EFT processing. I thought I'd also show you an invoice batch list. Let's see, this one. All right, so you can see this little pop-up. So this pop-up is document management link. So what this allows me to do is drag and drop PDFs or any other document into this little box, and it's like an electronic filing cabinet. So you can see this is invoice 235494. There it is. I can double click and open it. Okay, I don't want to, come on. Sometimes these pop-ups are so annoying. So I'm going to close that. But anyway, that's my invoice. Oh man, I'm stuck. But anyway, I'm not sure why stupid Adobe is acting like this. I don't really care. So anyway, this is my invoice from ADS, and that's my amount. So you can see that you can store all that stuff in your documents. You can also view it in vendor activity if you want. So that's just something that might be useful. So ADS 01, I can see all the documents for them. Okay. So anyway, that's document management link, also available from Orchid. So if you're interested, you can get a quote from Jim on that. All right, so that's invoice entry. Payment batch list. Do you do system check runs usually, or miscellaneous payments, or a little bit of each?
Scott uses the miscellaneous payments for manual checks.
Okay. So we'll talk about create payment batch. So that's going to be the first thing we're going to do. So remember at the beginning, we talked about selection codes for AP payments. So we've got multiple ones. We've got some for ACH. We've got some for checks. We've got one for all vendors. So we'll do one for checks. And so what is my payment date? This is going to be my check date. This is going to be my batch date. Usually that's going to be today. Okay. And then you can tell the system to only select vendors who are paid by this bank code if you want, or if you only have one bank code that you use, you can choose. You don't have to worry about that. Apply method, prorate by amount. And then you've got to fill in your criteria. So how am I selecting my documents? Due date, discount date, or both. If you're using discounts, I would say both. Because you don't want to miss your discount. So I want to pay documents due on or before. I'm going to make it in the past because I'm just going to make it 12/31/2020 because I don't want to pay off all of my AP. And I want to capture discounts available, you know. I'll just say 12. We'll pretend it's 12/20. And I'm going to click on my and then here's my from to. You can also say I want to pay everyone, but I'm holding off on paying this vendor. So you can actually exclude certain vendors. And this is at runtime. This is a runtime change. So it's only going to change for this check run. It's not going to change for everyone. So I'm not going to do that. And then I'm going to hit register because my pre-check register is going to show me what it's about to do. And it's going to do nothing. So let's change my dates. Let's go 22 to maybe, I'm just going to go, yeah, let's see what we get. See if we get something. Nothing. All right. That's the fun with sample data. So I'm going to go Alvin instead. So that'll be better. So we'll go. And we'll go here. Now we should get some data. All right. So now we can see these are all the payments that are going to get processed. We're taking some credit notes. And here they are. And if I go to the very end, I can see this is how much I'm about to pay. So at this point, you can play with your criteria and say, maybe I'm not going to pay vendor 7936. You can add that, here. So, and then you'll see, when you print the register, it'll have a lower total amount. So you can exclude an entire vendor at this point. Okay, so notice now we're paying $47,000. All right, and so let's say, yep, I'm pretty happy with that, but I'm probably going to change a couple things. So I've created payment batch 42, and now I'm going to go into my payment batch and I'm going to edit some things. So once you do that, remember in the beginning, I have a checkbox that said in your options, setup options, allow edit of system check batches. This is what this means. It means I can change things. So if I go to this one and I say, well, I'm going to hold off on a couple things. So I'm going to put it back into select mode. And I am not going to pay this one. And I think I'm actually not going to pay any of these. So you can actually go down and change all that. Now I guess because of that credit note, now I have a 0 amount. So let's save that. Why is it? Oh, I guess. Yeah, you can't have more than 0. So I'm going to uncheck these credit notes. Okay. Anyway, maybe I won't change that one. But anyway, because you can't have a payment less than 0. Actually, if I uncheck this one, now I have a payment amount. No, I don't. Wow, there's a lot of credit notes in this vendor. I think I'll just delete this transaction. So the point is you can edit. This one doesn't have credit notes. This will be a better example. So I'm not going to pay these two. So, you can edit. Now you can see my total amount is now down to $41,539. So if I'm happy with that, then what I would do is I would say I want to print post, and all the items that are checks would show up in this list. So, I'm just going to print them to the screen. Let's make sure this check form exists. I don't know if it does or not. We'll find out. And it does. So here we are. We've got a, picture of a check, pretty straightforward. And then I would print them, which obviously I'm not going to do. And then I would close. And then the system will ask me, did checks print successfully? Well, I actually don't want to post this batch because I don't want to clear my sample data. But if you said yes, then it would ask you if you want to post, and you would say yes. If something happened where you realize, oh goodness, I actually don't want to pay this $10,000 or something that you need to fix, then you're going to say no. And then you're going to flag all these as not printed, or you can select reprint range and just say from 0 to 105037, which is this check, set status to not printed. I could also just double click, and it's setting that status for me. And then I would close this window. Now, this is another area of confusion. If I close this window, it gives me a warning. It says, not all checks have been printed. Do you want to cancel the check run, voiding all previously printed checks? Now, a lot of people say, oh gosh, I don't want to delete my payment batch, so I'm going to say no. That's actually the wrong answer, and I'm going to show you why. So now I'm going to say no. And now I'm going to look at this batch, and the status is check creation in progress. So if I leave this and I go to lunch and I come back into the data, you're going to get a restart message. So I'm going to go back in, and you're going to get a restart message. And people typically kind of flip out when they see this. So the restart record just says something wasn't finished. It could be you were importing and didn't finish. It could be anything. So then what you have to do is figure out why. And the way to figure out why, if you have access to restart maintenance, is to go into restart maintenance, which is in administrative services. And then you can scroll and find why. And it says resuming check printing. So I know it's AP. So when my batch is in check creation and progress mode, I can't really do anything with it. So if I go in and I say I want to delete that entry, notice all my things are dimmed. So I can't really do anything. So I have to go back into the print post. And then I close it again, and I say, not all checks have been printed. Do you want to cancel the check run? Yes. And then that puts me back in edit mode so that I can go in, edit my batch, and then print my checks. So that's another frequently asked question, is why am I in check creation in progress? Notice that the voiding of that check run did not delete my batch. It just let me go back in and edit it. Okay. So since I don't want to post this batch, I'm actually going to delete it. And then I'm going to show you a couple other things here. All right. So I'm going to create a new batch. Oh, and by the way, the bank that's associated with the batch, you can only have one bank associated with a batch. So all payments out of this batch are going to be from this bank. Okay. If you need a different bank, you have to have a separate batch. So I'm going to go back to vendor number 1200, and I am going to look and see what we got outstanding. We've got plenty outstanding. So I can go in here and I can just do a payment rather than a check run. And I can say, well, I'm just going to pay these 3 items here, these 2 items here. I'm not going to take that credit note yet because I want to show you something with that. So that's how that would work. You can also do a miscellaneous payment to a vendor. And this would be how you would do your manual checks. So we'll say check, but then I would uncheck print check and put in my manual check number, whatever it is, invoice number. You have to enter your invoice number here, and then you put your GL account here. All right, and add. So that's how you manually enter payments. All right, so I'm actually going to post this one. Whoop. So I'm going to post, I'm going to pretend that I posted. I'm going to print my check. And this time I'm going to say that the check was okay. So I'll say yes. And I'm going to post my batch. So that's that. All right, so the next thing I want to show you is the aging. I'm just going to do an aging for this vendor, and I'm going to show you what happened with that unapplied credit note. So we're just going to do vendor 1200. So here's what you're going to see. All right, so vendor 1200. So we have a credit note here, or that's a prepayment. We've got this credit note, it's unapplied. So you see this minus and then all these pluses. Notice the credit note is in the current column because of our choice to age them as current. So we still have this unapplied credit note, okay? So what do we do with that? What we can do with that is apply it in a payment batch. So if I create a new entry, and by the way, this works the same way in accounts receivable. So apply credit note. My document type is going to be apply document, vendor 1200. Which document am I applying? I'm going to choose, there's a lot of unapplied credit notes. I'll do the one I did a little while ago. And now I hit this, and then I pick the invoice I want to apply it to, which is going to be, I'll just use this one, add. And then when I post it, that credit note will be associated and applied, reducing the current balance of that invoice. Okay. So the next thing I want to show you in payment batches is ACH payments or cash type payments. I'll use a payment and what you must never do. All right, so as soon as you use a payment type that's cash, you get this field, cash account. Now, the mistake people make is they'll say, oh, well, my bank account in the GL is account 1000, so I want to put that in there. However, if you fill in this cash account, it's telling the system to bypass the bank rec, but go right to GL. So almost never do you want to use a cash account because then you're going to be having problems when you reconcile the bank. So you always want to leave this one blank. The only reason I can think of using this is if you're paying with a credit card and you want it to not go into bank services, you want to just go to a credit card account, or if you have petty cash and you're just recording it, I'm paying it with my petty cash, so my petty cash drawer balance is going to go down somewhere where you would not be doing putting the transaction in a bank rec. So that's something that's really important to understand. So that's pretty much it. So I'm not actually going to do that entry. So that's pretty much it for payments. Now if we go back to our vendor inquiry for vendor 1200 and we look at our transactions, and we open it up, I'm going to do by document number. And so we can see, here's my credit note. Here's a document. You can see 750, and there's been 393 applied. Notice my current balance of my credit note is now 0 because I've applied it. So if I click open, I can see $750. I applied $356.82. Here's the credit note. Now my balance is $393.18. So that's what that looks like. Okay, the other kind of transactions you might do. Okay, so we've talked about invoice entry, payment entry. Let's look at payment inquiry because this is actually pretty helpful. So if you're trying to locate a payment for a vendor, you can say, I want payment date, let's just say 05/01/2020. So you can narrow it down. It takes a minute to refresh the screen. You can also say, I just want a certain vendor. And then I'm going to hit go. All right, we don't have anything. Oh, hold on. 531. Let's see if we have anything there. All right, let's do 1231. It's a problem with sample data. It's like you never know what's in there. All right, so now we have some payments we can look at. So you can see here's my bank. This would have been an ACH type thing because it's a no check number. Here's my payment date, period, vendor number, remit info, payment code, payment type, amount. And then internally, remember I said Sage internally names your payments. So this is the internal number assigned to the payment by Sage, kind of under the hood. And then my status for this is outstanding. So you can also look up and see my status. This one's reversed, sample data, no bank rec really. But anyway, so that is your check inquiry. You can click document and you can see the original payment entry in Sage. You can also click open and you can see, what invoice was applied to. And then if I hit print, it's going to print this list. So that's payment inquiry. It can be very handy if you're trying to hunt something down, or if a vendor, needs to know something. We talked about create payment patch. We have not talked about control payments. So control payments is where you are doing something to change or control a payment in a vendor. So let's pick any document. We'll pick this one. So this one is a zero balance. So let's pick one that has a balance. This is a good option. Okay, and then I'm going to hit go. It's going to populate my field. So what I can do with payment control is I can change the due date. So maybe you keyed something in and the terms were wrong. So this is actually due on 04, 20th. Or maybe the discount wasn't entered and I want to enter that information. Maybe I'm disputing it, so I would put it on hold. So those are the things you can do with control payments. You can also force a payment, which would force a payment that wasn't due yet in a check run. So on hold, I'll just put this one on hold so you can see. So that's what you can do with payment control. So now when I print this vendor's aging, okay, so let's go to vendor transaction reports and aging. So again, we're just going to do this vendor. And I'm going to hit print. And we're going to let it wake up. Okay. So you can see all my documents, my one with the 390 sum is missing. So when you print your aging, what you want to do is be aware of a number of things. So you always want to check your include vendors on hold, because that on hold transaction has been posted and theoretically it's still owed even though it's on hold. If you're printing an aging to compare to the general ledger, you want to make sure you change your cutoff. Your cutoff should be by either posting date or year and period. So if I choose posting date, my cutoff, we'll just say 03/31/24. Because if I do document date, it might not tie to the general ledger if my document date and my posting date were different. So that's a real common thing that people call me about, saying we're not balancing to the general ledger. And then I'm like, show me how you're doing your aging. And then we print it out with cutoff by posting date or year period, and then or checking vendors on hold, and then it ties. So those are kind of FAQs for the aging. So now if I include this, actually it's not going to include it because I think I cut it off by 331. Okay. So let me change my cutoff. So we'll capture that credit note because I want you to see what that looks like. Or not credit note, invoice. All right, so you can see this 1321 test invoice. You can see it's got an H, so that indicates it's an on hold transaction. If the entire vendor was on hold, you'd see a V. So if you look at the end of your aging, it gives you a little key. H means hold payment, V means vendor on hold, okay? So that's what that means. So you'd have to go back to control payments and take it off, take it off hold in order to pay that invoice. Or you could use a miscellaneous payment and pay it, and you'd get a warning, and then you could just bypass the warning. All right, so transactions. The last kind of transactions would be adjustment. We'll just look at this example here. So if you're adjusting a transaction in AP, actually I'll just create a new one. So AP ADJ, what happens is you've got to tell the system what invoice you are adjusting. So I'm going to go to vendor 1200 and then whatever my wrong amount, and then what's my document number. I choose it. Let's find one that has something in it. So I'll choose this one. And then you can actually choose the adjustment line. So when you choose the finder here, it's going to show you all the lines in your detail of your invoice when you first keyed it in. Now in this example, there was only one, but if there were more than one, you'd see them here and you'd say, well, I want to adjust the amount that went to account number 6,000 or whatever. But in this example, there's only one, so we'll just use that one. And the nice thing about that is it pulls up the original account number that we used for that line. So that's really convenient. So you know you're getting the account number right. So debit and credit. So the debit and credit indicates what's going to happen to account 1300. That does not indicate what's going to happen to AP. So if I debit 1300, I'm going to increase the invoice balance. If I credit 1300, I'm going to decrease the invoice balance. So I'm just going to increase it by $50, and I'm just going to press the insert key. And notice it shows what's happening to my payables total here, okay? So payable, so my totals, my debits, and that's the total of everything up here is here, okay? And then my payables adjustment shows a credit, which is going to increase my AP balance. So that document number will now, so if I go back, you can see I've made that adjustment. So if I post that, so, you know, the thing with this screen is you just have to think about it and pay attention to what's happening down here to the payables total. Because the most common thing with adjustments is people get confused and they do it the wrong way, and all of a sudden they've doubled an invoice or, you know, done it the opposite to where they wanted, and then they have to do another adjustment for twice as much to fix. So anyway, that's that. Now, what's the difference between a credit note and adjustment? A credit note, I mean, really, effectively, there isn't one. You can use a credit note and a debit note in invoice entry. The thing about adjustments is they tend to just hang out on your aging forever, and unless you uncheck adjustment on the aging. So I don't know. I personally usually use credit note and debit note if I screwed something up or if something needs to be changed or whatever. But either way is perfectly valid. So that's basically it. So adjustment entry, payment entry, and invoice entry can be accessed from the invoice batch list, the payment batch list, and the adjustment batch list. Post batches, again, you can do that from the adjustment from all your batch lists, or you can do it from here. But if you do it from here, they have to be ready to post. I never use this icon because I work everything from the batch list because I just find it easier. So anyway, the last thing we got here is some reports. So the setup reports are things that you're probably not going to use that often, if ever. But basically, they print out all the things that we did in AP setup. So options, account sets, 1099s, etc. So this would just print out your options, your account sets, your 1099s, your codes, your terms, all of those things. So people usually don't print those out. They might print the 1099 ones out, maybe, but probably not. Vendor reports. So again, print out of your vendor groups. If you print out your vendors, you have some things that you can choose. So you can print out your vendors, which would include your address, maybe your recurring payables. Maybe you just want to print out vendor comments, and then you can do from to a certain date. Let's see, optional fields, if you're using them, the vendor profile, that would be all your choices, like the vendor account group, the invoicing info, all that. You can also print vendor activity statistics or vendor period statistics. So for your 630, you might want to do period statistics for fiscal year in 2024 from period 07 to 12 to capture your year-to-date payments. So we can also, by the way, export that out. So anyway, that's what the vendor report allows you to do. Okay. So just be aware of those drop downs. Remit to locations, same thing. It's just going to print them out for you. Recurring payables, it's going to list them in the default GL account number again. People don't usually print this out. Letters and labels, you can send that and email to all your vendors if you want, or print. You can do vendor, and then the vendor remit to would be, email if that's the case. So for instance, if you were moving or something, you might want to send something to your vendor, please note new address, or if your company name changed, I don't know, you could send them that notification. Okay. And you could elect to include vendors with a zero balance. So that's really about all you can email out of the box for accounts payable, unless you get EFT processing. All right, this is important, 1099 filing. So here's what you're going to do for 1099 filing. So you've got two types that are probably going to be applicable for you: non-employee compensation and miscellaneous. So what happens with this is you print them separately because they're separate forms and need to be filed separately. So I'm going to click process, and this will give me my 2023 miscellaneous. It's probably going to want to update the forms, which I'm actually going to not do because anyway. Oh, yeah, sure. No, I'm going to start over. I'm actually going to start over. All right. So this little wizard is going to step you through. So you can choose, what you want to do. I want to just start processing my 1099s, or I want to do a test drive with the first 25, or I want to do a test drive with all of my vendors. I'm just going to start processing. So it makes you verify your tax ID. And by the way, the tax ID needs to be entered in your company profile. So let me remind you where that is. That is under Common Services, Company Profile. So before you start, you want to make sure your tax ID is input. Okay. All right. So back to Atrix. And then it's going to ask you, do I have multiple 1099 files using the same EIN and the same form type? The answer will be no. You have one form type for miscellaneous, one for NEC, non-employee compensation, but they're separate. So the answer is no. So I'm going to click next. And it's going to have me verify some things. So I'm just going to make something up. So it'll go past. I'm filing for my company or an employer. There's no Maryland tax withholding, and unless you are doing withholding, you actually don't. Well, if you have, where are you guys located? Are you in PA? Yeah. So you actually will have to enter your Pennsylvania number because you have to file Pennsylvania taxes. So anyway, you would, and we'll do this, at the end of the year together, but you would just double click, you'd edit and put your Pennsylvania state tax ID in here. Okay. I'm going to not do that. I'm going to hit next. Local tax, there isn't any. I'm not doing electronic because you'd have to input all those vendors into Atrix, which probably don't want to do. I highly recommend truncating social security numbers because, they're being mailed. So I'll click next. And now it's going to bring up the Atrix worksheet. So it's feeding in. Now I only have one miscellaneous. So what this form does is it steps you through and it validates things for you. So since this is an EIN, I don't have to have the first name and last name. But if it was a social, the last name and first name would feed in from Sage. And that was one of those new features. For 2022, it didn't feed in and people had to manually key in all the first names and last names. For socials, it was a pain. So that's been fixed. Employer ID, for the company, and then the company name. So anyway, we're verifying the TIN. We're going to just click next. And this is also going to validate for you if there's anything that's clearly not right. So like if there was a character missing in the EIN, or something like that, like 8 characters, it would tell you and you would have to fix that. And then next. So we're looking at the recipient's names. And you can pretty much just okay, so now it's showing, these are some of the things. Remember I told you about periods and things. So in your IRS disallows commas and periods and special characters in 1099 electronic filing. So for the name, it's going to fix this for us. So notice how it says Mr. Period Carl Jenner. It won't allow that. So we're going to click OK. And it's taking the period out. Now, the other thing you have to make sure is you want to make sure you don't have any cities that have dashes or hyphens, or same with street numbers. You don't want periods in there. You want to make sure it's the 2-character ID for the state. So you don't want to spell out Montana. You want to use MO because, in the case of Montana, it would be correct, but like there's some of them that are like Maine. I think the state ID is ME and it would feed in as MA if you typed out Maine. And then of course that would be wrong. So that's another thing you'll want to do. So next it's checking my addresses. And now we're looking at my income boxes. Everything looks great. And then filing state is correct. That for you is going to be Pennsylvania, regardless of where the vendor is located. And then no withholding in this case. And then what happens is it brings up this e-filing thing. And then what you do, I'm not going to go any further than this because it wants you to set up an account and all this kind of thing. But they will mail your recipient copies. They will e-file your recipient copies and all of that. So, you don't have to feed it into another system. So the 1099 chore is making sure your vendor is set up correctly, making sure your amounts are correct, and then it just feeds right in. So if I click next, what it's going to do, then it's going to ask, do you want to have a paper archive or PDF archive? Most people say no, but you could if you wanted. And then here's what it's going to do. And then it's going to make me log in, which of course I'm not going to do. So here's my federal. So this is where you're going to print out your copies. So you would print the copy. I'm just going to save it as a PDF. So we'll just use this. All right. And then next, it'll think it and so on. So anyway, it has you print your 1099. These are your record copies. I'm going to say next. I'm going to say no. And then I would print this out. I'm going to pretend that I did it. And then it's going to log into Atrix. And this is where we can't go any farther because we need to have an account with Atrix. Excuse me, I need to get a glass of water. I'll be back. Okay. All right. So anyway, we're not going to log into Atrix and file fictitious 1099s for a fee. So I'll just close all that. No. All right. So I'll close that. So that's how it works. So, the big thing is making sure all your data is correct. Once you're pretty sure that it's correct, you can e-file and, that's how it works. So we'll make sure that your info is correct, when you go live in July, and then it can start accumulating when you go live. So let's see, that's the last of vendor reports. And yep, that's it. Now these are just custom reports I made for somebody, so they won't apply to you because they're for dividends. The last thing are AP transaction reports. So batch listing, that just is a printout of your batch, which you can also do from the batch list screen. You can print your batch listing. Batch status lists your batches and whether they're ready to post, whether they're posted, whether they're open. Posting journals is what got posted in a batch. Check register. So this might be interesting. So you can print a check register from here. And there are your checks, and it's sorted by vendor. Okay. And GL transactions, that'll always be empty if you auto post to the GL. If you have it set to on request, then your GL transactions will accumulate, but very few people do that. If you have a batch that rolls into an error batch, you want to come in here and print your posting errors. So what you want to do with that is you want to go back to let's say there's an error batch in your AP. Do I have one? I don't know if I do. It would be nice if I did. I do not, But anyway, if you had an error batch in AP, what you would do is it would say errors from batch 48 or something like that. And what would happen is then you would go to batch 48 and you'd scroll over and make note of the posting sequence, which is here. 36 would be the posting sequence. And then you would go back to your transaction report and you would print your posting errors for posting sequence 36. Now, there aren't any, but that is another frequent thing that people who don't know about this report, they'll call and say, I've got an AP batch, it's an error batch, I can't post it, why? And then in 2 minutes, I show them this report and it says, fiscal period is locked or, whatever the problem is. So it'll tell you exactly why. Vendor transactions. This is where you can list transactions for a date range for a vendor. So if I wanted to look at transactions for vendor 1200 and I wanted, maybe I'm just going to do, let's say 01/01/20 to 12/31/2020. And then you can choose what transactions you want to include, and whether you want fully paid transactions or just transactions that have a balance. Fully paid transactions, that might be something you want. So this is just a list of what you've done with this vendor for a date range. So it takes a minute. Okay. So here we go. We've got our, here's an invoice, here's a credit note, a payment, here's the balance. So this thing has a balance of 0. This is my current balance for that vendor. So that's vendor transactions. We talked about the aging and the cutoff. That's really important. Age cash requirements. That is a report that shows you what cash you're going to need for whatever aging periods you put in there. Personally, most people don't know what they're going to owe in 60 or 90 days. So you might make this like, 07, 14, 30 or something like that, or 15-day increments to kind of see what's coming up. So it's very much like an aging, but it's really talking more about, it's from a cash requirements. So it's not going to include, things that aren't due. Okay. So you can see current, okay, 1 to 7 days, and then total. Okay. So that is just another kind of flavor of your aging. Okay. Age retainage does not apply. Periodic processing, we talked about creating a GL batch, or you won't be creating a GL batch because it's auto posting. We talked about creating a recurring batch, which you might do. Retainage batch you won't do. The CPRS, that's Canada again. Year end, people don't always do this, really. Because honestly, my opinion is, why reset all batch numbers? I mean, it just doesn't matter, in my opinion. I don't like clearing. I mean, you might do this if you had like 25 years of data and your system is getting bogged down. Of course, you're starting a new data set, so that really won't apply. So I really don't do year end. Delete inactive records. You can delete inactive vendors, vendor groups, remit to, or recurring if their set is inactive, and in the case of vendors, if they have no activity. So if vendor has activity, even if it's 20 years ago, and they're inactive, they won't get deleted. So you'd have to actually clear, so that you'd have to do some clearing of history. So you could say, fully paid documents through, and then you could choose your vendor. So if you have an inactive vendor, I'm like, I'm going to blow out this stuff. It's been 10 years. I don't, blah, blah, blah. So that's how that would work. Okay. You might clear vendor comments that have expired, you know. Again, I pretty much never clear anything because once it's gone forever. Create recurring payable, we talked about. Yep, so that's really it. We have hit every single icon in accounts payable. So do you have any questions? I know it's a lot.
No, I don't have questions at this time. I'm just slightly overwhelmed. So
Yeah,
thank you.
you're welcome. Yeah.